I rushed to the hospital to see my son in intensive care. Suddenly, the nurse whispered, "Hide, and trust me." I froze behind the door of the next room, my heart pounding. But why would a nurse tell me to hide when all I wanted was to hold my dying son? Who was she protecting me from? Or had my daughter-in-law Sienna filed restraining orders I didn't know about? Had she convinced everyone I was the problem, the overbearing mother who needed to be kept away? None of it made sense. But something in that nurse's desperate eyes made me obey. So I hid. And what I discovered in those horrible minutes behind that door would terrify even the terrible. But let me start at the beginning. The call came at 2:47 a.m. It was the hospital calling about my dear son Julian. The voice on the other end spoke words that froze my heart. "Your son has collapsed. Critical condition. Intensive care." I didn't think. I just ran. The 20-minute drive to downtown hospital took 8 minutes. I remember nothing except my heartbeat pounding like a war drum. Please, God, not my boy. Streetlights blurred past like dying stars as I gripped the wheel, whispering prayers into the dark. 3 weeks ago at Sunday dinner. The last time I'd seen my son Julian alive and well, or pretending to be. He'd sat at the head of the table, pale and trembling. "Just tired, Mom," he'd said, forcing a smile that didn't touch his eyes. His wife, Sienna, had laughed her bright, practiced laugh. "He's been working too hard," she said, laying a manicured hand over his. "Too perfect, too polished." Even then I'd noticed the way she spoke for him, the way her eyes followed every move he made. "Watch people when they think no one's watching," my late husband used to say. "That's when you see who they are." 7 months. That's how long Julian had been sick. Nausea, headaches, weight loss, endless hospital visits. The doctors found nothing. Stress, they said, anxiety. And through it all, Sienna never left his side. So gentle, so devoted, I'd been grateful, God help me. The hospital parking lot was empty when I arrived. I abandoned the car and ran. The sterile brightness inside burned my eyes. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. The ICU was on the 4th floor. The elevator crawled upward, and my reflection in the metal doors showed a stranger, wild-eyed, gray hair loose, silk pajamas under my coat. When the doors opened, I heard it. Soft laughter. My body froze. That sound didn't belong here. I followed it to the waiting area. Sienna. Sitting elegantly, phone in hand, one leg crossed over the other. Perfect hair, perfect makeup. Laughing quietly, like sharing a secret. Not crying, not afraid, just amused. Cold crept up my spine. Maybe she was coping, maybe she was nervous, maybe. But the laughter rang wrong, hollow. I turned away before she saw me and hurried to the nurse's station. "I'm Vivian Hartwell. My son Julian." He was brought in. The older nurse looked up, pity softening her face. "Room 407. But Mrs. Hartwell, he's critical, on life support. The doctors are doing everything they can." Life support. The words cut deep. "This is the 7th time," I whispered. 7 times in 8 months, and no one knows why. The nurses exchanged a glance. "They're running full tests," the younger one said carefully, "including toxicology." The word hit me like a stone. Toxicology. "I need to see him." "Of course," the older nurse said gently. "3rd door on the right. Prepare yourself. There are a lot of machines." I walked the corridor like a sleepwalker, the hum of lights, the steady beeping of life measured in numbers. I reached room 407. Through the half-open door I could see the machines, the motionless shape of my son beneath white sheets. I was 3 steps away when a hand caught my wrist. A young nurse, dark eyes fixed on mine. Her badge read Grace Mabry, RN. "Mrs. Hartwell," she whispered urgently. "Wait. I need to see my son." She leaned closer, voice trembling. "Please, next room, behind the door. Don't make a sound." Her grip tightened. "If you want to save your son, you need to see this." Something in her eyes, fear, certainty, made me obey. Grace pulled me into the adjoining room, hiding me behind the door. From there I could see into Julian's room through the narrow gap. The hiss of the ventilator filled the silence. Grace squeezed my shoulder once, then slipped away. Seconds stretched into forever. Then, footsteps. 2 sets, confident, unhurried. And her voice. "Make it quick," Sienna said. "His mother just arrived. We don't have much time." The blood in my veins turned to ice. From my hiding place, I watched her glide into the room. My daughter-in-law, the woman who'd spoon-fed my son, wiped his brow, cried on my shoulder. She stood beside his bed, no trace of grief in her face. A man followed her in, mid-40s, expensive suit, briefcase in hand. His smile was thin, predatory. Sienna spoke again, her tone clipped. "Professional. Is it done?" He nodded. "The dosage will finish the job. By morning the organs will start shutting down. No one will question it after the last episode." My knees nearly buckled. I bit my fist to keep from crying out. "Good," she said, glancing at the door. "Transfer the funds once the report's finalized. I'll send you the account number." He smirked. "You're colder than I expected, Mrs. Hartwell." She smiled faintly. "Don't call me that. The name won't matter much longer." My stomach turned. Every motherly instinct I had screamed to burst in, to tear her away from him, but I couldn't move. My hands shook so hard I thought I'd drop to the floor. Julian lay motionless, machines breathing for him, while the woman he loved signed his death sentence inches away. When the man left, Sienna lingered. She smoothed Julian's hair with careful fingers, the gesture almost tender. "You should have listened," she murmured. "You were too smart for your own good." She bent down, brushed her lips against his forehead. "Sleep tight, darling." Then she straightened, checked her reflection in the monitor glass, and walked out. Calm, composed, her heels clicking like gunshots down the hall. I stood frozen, breath trapped in my throat, the truth crashing over me like a wave. The sickness, the unexplained hospitalizations, the laughter in the waiting room. It all made sense now. Sienna hadn't been caring for him. She'd been killing him, slowly, methodically, while smiling for the world. Grace reappeared beside me, her face pale. "You understand now," she whispered. I nodded, tears burning my eyes. "How long? She's been poisoning him, small doses. The lab results will confirm it." My heart shattered and hardened in the same instant. Grief turned sharp, cold, deliberate. I looked back at Julian through the gap in the door, at the machines keeping him alive. Then I looked at Grace. "Help me," I said softly. "Help me make her pay." And in that sterile white corridor, under the hum of fluorescent lights, something inside me changed forever. Vivian Hartwell, the grieving mother, died that night. The woman who replaced her was something else entirely, something that would not rest until justice was served. I pressed myself against the wall of the empty hospital room, barely breathing. My heart was a war drum in my chest, so loud I was certain they would hear it. Through the gap in the partially open door, I had a clear view into Julian's room. The machines beeped steadily, measuring out my son's life in electronic pulses. He lay motionless in the bed, tubes snaking from his arms, a ventilator breathing for him. My baby. My only child. And I was hiding from his wife. The footsteps grew louder. Then they appeared in my line of sight. Sienna, still perfectly composed in her cashmere sweater, and a man I'd never seen before. He was in his 50s, expensive charcoal suit, leather briefcase in hand, silver hair slicked back. Everything about him screamed money and corruption. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent his life finding loopholes and exploiting them. Malcolm Dietrich, though I didn't know his name yet. I would learn it soon enough. They entered Julian's room without hesitation. Sienna didn't rush to her husband's bedside. She didn't collapse, in grief, or stroke his face with tender concern. Instead, she glanced at the heart monitor with the clinical detachment of someone checking a stock price, then turned to the man. "Close the door," she said quietly. Her voice was different now. Stripped of all the warmth and sweetness I'd grown accustomed to, this voice was cold, efficient, businesslike, the voice of a woman conducting a transaction. Malcolm closed the door, but not completely. A sliver of space remained, just enough for me to see and hear everything, just enough for Grace's plan to work, though I didn't understand that yet. Sienna moved closer to Julian's bed, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe she was going to break down, to show some fragment of genuine emotion. She reached out and stroked his hair, her fingers trailing down his pale cheek. But when I saw her face, my stomach turned to ice. There was no love there, no grief, just cold calculation and something that looked almost like impatience. "The guardianship papers need to be filed today," she said, still stroking Julian's hair like you'd pet a dog you were planning to put down. "He won't wake up for this. The doctors said he could be unconscious for days, maybe longer." Her hand stilled on his face. Perfect timing, really, perfect timing. She said it like she was talking about a sale at her favorite boutique. I bit down on my fist to keep from screaming. Malcolm set his briefcase on the visitor's chair and opened it with practiced ease. "Once you're legal guardian, you control everything," he said, pulling out thick stacks of paper. "Medical decisions, life support decisions, power of attorney, access to all accounts, investments, property deeds." He looked up at her with a smile that made my skin crawl. "Everything transfers to you as his legal guardian and spouse. His mother has no say anymore. His mother has no say anymore." The words echoed in my head, sharp as broken glass. "And the policy?" Sienna asked. She'd moved away from Julian now, all pretense of wifely concern abandoned. She was studying the papers Malcolm spread across the small table by the window. "The $2 million policy. When does that pay out?" My vision blurred. $2 million. There was a life insurance policy on my son that I knew nothing about. When had she done that? When had she forged his signature, manipulated him into signing, convinced him they needed it? Malcolm's smile widened. "Upon death. But as legal guardian, you control all medical decisions, life support, resuscitation orders, everything." He didn't say the rest. He didn't need to. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Once Sienna had guardianship, she could simply turn off the machines, sign a DNR order, let my son die, and call it mercy. "It's all very clean," Malcolm continued, "very legal. No one will question a grieving widow making difficult end-of-life decisions for her suffering husband." Sienna laughed. It was soft, barely more than a breath, but it was the most chilling sound I'd ever heard. "7 months," she said, almost to herself. 7 months I've been so patient, measuring every dose, watching him get weaker, listening to him complain about feeling tired. She turned back to look at Julian, and her expression was pure contempt. "I'm done waiting. Once these papers are filed, we can move forward. I'll give it 3 days, maybe 4, long enough to look appropriately devastated. Then we pull the plug and I collect." The room spun. The walls closed in. 7 months of patience. Measuring every dose. The truth crashed over me like a tidal wave, drowning me in its horror. She'd been poisoning him. Slowly, methodically, systematically destroying my son from the inside out. Every meal she'd cooked with such devotion. Every cup of tea she'd brought him when he felt ill. Every vitamin she'd insisted he take for his health. Poison, all of it. And I'd watched it happen. I'd smiled and thanked her for taking such good care of him. I'd welcomed this monster into our family, into our home, into my son's bed, and she'd used that trust to murder him by inches. I used to believe family was everything. I was right. I just never imagined family could be the weapon that destroys you. Standing there behind that door, watching the woman I'd called daughter plot my son's death with casual efficiency, I felt something inside me break. Not shatter. That would be too clean, too complete. It broke the way bones break when they're crushed slowly, grinding and splintering into pieces that can never quite fit together again. The mother who'd trusted Sienna, who'd believed in the goodness of people, who'd thought love could conquer anything. She died in that moment. What rose from her ashes was something colder, sharper, something that understood that sometimes love isn't gentle. Sometimes it's a blade, and I was about to become the hand that wielded it. Grace found me after they left. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen behind that door, watching Malcolm pack up his briefcase of death certificates disguised as legal documents, watching Sienna take one last look at Julian with those dead, calculating eyes before they walked out together, already discussing filing timelines and notary publics. When Grace's hand touched my shoulder, I nearly screamed. "Come with me," she whispered, urgency threading through every word. Quickly, Before she comes back. She pulled me out of the room, down a different corridor, away from the ICU and its terrible fluorescent truths. We moved through a maze of hallways until we reached a door marked Staff Only. Grace pushed it open and pulled me inside. It was a break room, lockers, a coffee maker, a small table with mismatched chairs, the burnt smell of too many long shifts. She locked the door behind us. I collapsed into one of the chairs, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. My hands were shaking so violently I had to grip the edge of the table to steady them. "She's killing him," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, too big, too impossible. "My daughter-in-law is killing my son." Saying it out loud made it real in a way that watching it hadn't. Real and horrible and so far beyond anything I'd imagined that my mind kept trying to reject it, to find some other explanation that made sense. Grace sat across from me, her dark eyes steady and serious. "I know," she said quietly. "I've known for 3 weeks." 3 weeks. The words hit me like a slap. "You knew? Why didn't you—" But she was already shaking her head. "I suspected. There's a difference. I'm a nurse, Mrs. Hartwell. I see patterns. Your son's symptoms, they didn't fit any normal diagnosis. Gastric distress, neurological symptoms, organ stress, but no clear cause. No infection, no disease markers. Nothing that explained why a healthy 32-year-old man was dying by inches. So I started documenting," Grace continued. Her voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the anger beneath it. Controlled fury at her own helplessness. Every time he was admitted, every symptom, every test result. And I noticed something else. His wife. She said the word like it tasted bad. She was always too calm, too controlled, and she always insisted on bringing him his meals from home. Said hospital food upset his stomach. The nurses thought it was sweet. I felt sick. All those meals Sienna had brought to the hospital. All those loving gestures I'd witnessed and praised. "She was poisoning him even here," I whispered. Grace nodded. "That's what I suspected. But suspicion isn't proof. I couldn't go to the police or hospital administration without evidence. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, that I was trying to cause trouble. I needed someone with authority to request the right tests." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "So I ran his blood work myself. Without authorization. Off the books. I could lose my license for it." "What did you find?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Didn't want this confirmed in clinical, medical terms that would make it undeniable. Grace pulled a folded piece of paper from her scrubs pocket and slid it across the table. Elevated arsenic levels. Consistent with chronic poisoning over an extended period. Someone's been giving him small doses, regular doses for months, maybe longer. It's in his tissue, his hair, his blood. It's killing him slowly, and if it continues, her voice caught, he has maybe 48 hours before the organ damage becomes irreversible, before we lose him completely. 48 hours. 2 days. Less than 2 days to save my son's life. "Why?" I asked hoarsely. "Why did you help me? Why did you risk your career for a patient you barely know?" Grace's expression shifted, something raw and painful crossing her face. "I had a brother," she said quietly, "older than me by 3 years. He married young, to a woman who seemed perfect, loving, devoted, but she isolated him, controlled him, made him doubt his own reality." She paused, swallowing hard. "By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. He died in a car accident that wasn't really an accident. She'd been abusing him for years and we never saw it." The pain in her voice was a living thing. "I see the patterns now," Grace continued. "I see the isolation tactics, the control, the victim who's been gaslit into not trusting their own instincts. I saw it in your son, and I saw it in you at that family dinner 3 weeks ago. I was here that night working when they brought Julian in. His wife asked me to send you away, said he didn't want to see you, that you made him anxious." She looked at me steadily. "But his medical file listed you as emergency contact. His phone had 17 missed calls from you. That didn't match a man who didn't want to see his mother. I brought her into our home," I said, and my voice broke on the words. All the grief and guilt I'd been holding back came crashing through. "I chose her for him. I thought she was perfect. I thought he was so lucky to find someone who loved him that much. Tears burned down my face, hot and bitter. I did this. I gave my son to a monster and smiled while she destroyed him. The truth of it was crushing. I'd been so blind, so stupid, so desperate to believe my son had found happiness that I'd ignored every warning sign. Grace reached across the table and gripped my hand hard enough to hurt. "Stop," she said, and her voice was fierce. "You didn't know. She's a predator, Mrs. Hartwell. Predators are good at hiding what they are. That's how they survive." She squeezed tighter. "You didn't do this. She did. But now you know. And what matters, the only thing that matters now, is what you do next." What I did next. The question hung between us, heavy with possibility and danger, and the weight of my son's life hanging in the balance. "I want to see him," I said. My voice was steadier now. The grief was still there, but underneath it something else was crystallizing, something cold and hard and absolutely certain. "I need to see my son." Grace nodded and stood. 5 minutes. That's all I can give you before someone notices. She's downstairs filing paperwork, but she'll be back. She unlocked the door and led me back through the maze of corridors to Julian's room. 5 minutes, Mrs. Hartwell. Then we need to move fast. She left me alone with him. My boy. My baby. He looked so small in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines and tubes and the electronic evidence of his failing body. I took his hand. It was cool, limp, nothing like the strong hands that used to grab me in bear hugs when he was young. "I'm sorry," I whispered, leaning close to his ear. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I let her hurt you." The tears came again, but they were different now. Not helpless grief, something sharper. "But I see it now, Julian. I see everything. And I promise you, I swear on your father's grave, she will never hurt you again." The machines beeped steadily, measuring out his heartbeats. 48 hours. That's all the time we had. A mother's love is supposed to be gentle. It's supposed to be soft lullabies and warm embraces and unconditional forgiveness. But sometimes love isn't gentle. Sometimes it's a blade. Sometimes it's the hand that holds the knife and the will to use it. Sienna wanted a war. She'd spent 7 months waging it, slowly murdering my son while wearing the mask of devotion. Well, she was about to learn something about mothers. We don't just love our children. We go to war for them. And when we fight to win. No mercy, no hesitation, no prisoners. She'd made her first mistake when she hurt my son. Her second was letting me find out. She wouldn't get a chance to make a third. I called Tobias Wren at 6 from the hospital parking garage. Grace had given me his name on a torn scrap of paper. "He's ex-homicide," she'd whispered. "Left the force 5 years ago, but he's the best." The morning light painted the concrete in a cruel gold while I waited for him to pick up. When he answered, gruff, alert, I told him everything. The strange illnesses, the repeated hospitalizations, the laughter in the waiting room, the man in a suit who'd been in Julian's room. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. "Don't move." He arrived 19 minutes later in a black sedan, looking like someone who'd watched the worst and refused to be surprised by it. He kept his hand in mine for a moment. "Tell me everything," he said, and I did. We sat in his car while I spilled 7 months of fear. Tobias didn't interrupt. He simply listened, his face closed and serious. When I finished, he reached into his briefcase and produced a tablet. "Money tells the story," he said. "If she's after him, she's already touching his accounts." He asked for access to everything, bank statements, credit cards, insurance papers, the family trust Maxwell had set up. I handed over passwords and documents with shaking hands. He worked fast, fingers moving across the screen like a man mapping a crime scene. "I'll read her trail," he promised. 12 hours later, he called. We met again in the garage. His expression was stone. He handed me a thick folder of printouts, bank transfers, odd withdrawals, new cards opened in Julian's name. Red circles and highlights marked a pattern. Money siphoned out. Expenses Julian never made. Changes timed with the worst dips in his health. Then Tobias slid a life insurance document across the seat. $2 million. Sienna listed as sole beneficiary. Filed 6 months ago. The signature looked right at first glance, then not right when you knew what to look for. Tobias pointed out small practice deviations. "She practiced forging his name," I said, voice flat. He nodded. Pharmacy records were next. Tobias had a contact who could pull prescription histories. The legality of it didn't concern me as much as the facts. Sienna had been filling prescriptions under several aliases: sedatives, painkillers, medications that could be repurposed to mask poisoning. Then he produced something worse: a hardware store receipt and grainy security footage. Rat poison, arsenic-based, bought, with plastic sheeting, rubber gloves, industrial cleaner. In the footage, a woman in sunglasses loaded supplies into a cart. She looked like Sienna, only trying too hard not to be noticed. Finally, Tobias handed me a thin file with a different name on it. "Sienna Corvain isn't her real name," he said. "Her legal name, Sienna Vale. She'd changed it 4 years earlier, after the death of her previous husband, Marcus Grayson, a wealthy real estate developer. Marcus's death had been ruled natural causes, but his family had suspected foul play. They'd been denied an autopsy, and he was cremated before tests could be done. The symptoms in Marcus's final months, gastric distress, fatigue, progressive organ failure, mirrored Julian's. Tobias's face was grim. "She learned," he said. "Julian wasn't the first." The realization landed with cold clarity. Sienna had a pattern: charm, isolation, control, profit. She'd married, collected, moved on. Now she'd chosen my son. The grief and rage braided into something hard and focused. "She's not going to win this time," Tobias said quietly. He closed the folder and looked at me like a man who'd decided something irreversible. "We'll get the proof the courts need. We'll trace every dime, every purchase. We'll catch her in the act if we have to." Sitting there with pages of betrayal in my lap, I felt the hunt shift. I was no longer a woman waiting for a miracle. I was a woman with a plan and an investigator who believed her. Walking back into the hospital with knowledge that could burn Sienna alive was the hardest thing I'd done. Grace's advice replayed in my head. "We need proof. No theatrics. Proof that holds up." So I put on a mask, the grieving, trusting mother-in-law everyone expected. Sienna was waiting in the room when I arrived. Her grief was immediate and theatrical. Tears, a sob, a desperate embrace. I returned the hug, smoothed her hair, murmured comfort. Each practiced tremor in her voice set my teeth on edge, but I held it together. "He's strong," I said. "He'll pull through." The word family passed between us like a test. She flinched at it for a half-beat before her performance resumed. Malcolm Dietrich arrived later. Slick suit, smoother voice, a lawyer's polite predation. He produced guardianship forms and spoke of urgent medical decisions, of Sienna as primary guardian and me as a formal co-signer. The documents were the end game. Sign here and she'd control Julian's care, hospital permissions, access to assets, effectively the power to let him go. I pretended to read while my mind catalogued the paper as trap. I delayed, asked for my own attorney, and watched annoyance flicker across Sienna's face. Fast, raw, then buried under perfect composure. That tiny crack rewarded me. She'd never expected resistance. Grace was my unseen ally. Behind the curtain, she rerouted Julian's IVs, put his meds under locked control, and flagged his records to toxicology. "I'm pulling anything she might touch off the table," she said. "No visitors near his bed without me." She switched medications to hospital-supplied saline and arranged immediate chelation to flush arsenic from his system. The doctors called Julian's improvement unexpected, a hopeful variance that made Sienna's smile shudder. Panic tightened her features for a moment before she masked it with relief. She wasn't relieved, she was desperate. Over the next 48 hours, small triumphs accumulated. Julian's liver values improved. His kidneys steadied. He wasn't out of danger, but he was no longer sliding toward the finish Sienna had scheduled. Meanwhile, she unraveled. I watched her check her phone, pace hallways for private calls, attempt to slip into Julian's room alone, an attempt Grace intercepted with clinical calm. "Hospital protocol," Grace said, blocking the path. Sienna's hatred flashed hot and raw before she folded it into sweetness. Each time she was rebuffed, she became more reckless. On the third night, Sienna tried to bypass security with a stolen visitor badge. Grace caught her in the corridor, calm and implacable. The confrontation was brief: protocol, denial, a honeyed apology from Sienna, and an escort back to the waiting room. But the attempt proved a point. She was cornered, and cornered predators act rashly. I felt the net tighten, the guardianship delays, the forensic flags, Tobias tracing transactions. Time was a weapon in our hands now. We waited. I kept smiling for cameras and staff, played the part until my face hurt, and let the professionals tighten their case. My grief refired into a cold focus: keep Julian alive long enough for the lab work to show arsenic in his system, long enough for Tobias to present a money trail that couldn't be dismissed, long enough for the hospital to follow protocol and lock down access. Sienna's plan had been patient and methodical. Ours had to be precise and patient in its own way. When the cracks widened and Sienna's mask finally slipped, when she cursed under her breath in a hallway or left a phone call open for too long, I filed the moments away. Each mistake was evidence. Each misstep was another thread to pull. I no longer wanted to tear her apart with my hands. I wanted her seen, exposed, and made accountable in a court where theatrics meant nothing and documents meant everything. I held my son's cool hand, watched the machine steady his breath, and vowed in the quiet between beeps that I would see this through until the end, whatever that end might be. Tobias returned 2 days later with a dossier thick enough to bury my daughter-in-law. We met in the hospital cafeteria during the afternoon lull, tucked in a corner booth away from curious ears. He slid the folder across the table, his face grave. "Sienna Vale," he said quietly. "That's her real name. She changed it to Sienna Corvain 4 years ago, right after Marcus Grayson's death, but her trail goes back further than that." Inside the folder were arrest records from Nevada and Arizona. Fraud, identity theft, forgery. "She's wanted in 2 states, Tobias continued. Never convicted of violence, which is why she passed background checks. But she's a predator. She targets wealthy men, isolates them, and drains them dry." He handed me another paper. A coroner's report for Marcus Grayson. The symptoms were identical to Julian's: nausea, fatigue, organ failure. "His family suspected poisoning," Tobias said. "They tried to get toxicology tests, but by the time they could, she'd ordered the cremation. No body, no evidence. His sister never stopped believing," he added. "When I told her what happened to Julian, she cried. She's flying here tomorrow. She kept everything: medical files, bank statements, emails. It proves a pattern." He showed me offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, $300,000, siphoned from Julian's funds in small increments. Fake IDs, a passport under another name, plane tickets to Buenos Aires booked for 2 weeks from now. My blood turned to ice. She was going to kill him, collect the insurance, wait for suspicion to fade, then vanish. Tobias nodded grimly. "But the DA's office is ready. They want to reopen the Grayson case and charge her with attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. All they need is medical proof and your son's testimony." "Grace has the toxicology reports," I said. "They show arsenic levels consistent with chronic poisoning." I hesitated. "And Julian woke up this morning." Tobias's eyes sharpened. "Does he know?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I wanted to wait until I had everything. I don't know how to tell him the woman he loves tried to kill him." Tobias's expression softened. "He deserves the truth, and we'll need him to help make this airtight." He gathered the papers, then added, "One more thing, Malcolm Dietrich. I told him what he's facing as her accomplice. He's agreed to wear a wire. He'll meet her tomorrow, talk about the guardianship papers, and we'll get her confession." An hour later, I sat beside Julian's bed and told him everything. I showed him the evidence: the forged signatures, the pharmacy records, the offshore accounts, the photo of Marcus Grayson. My son's face, pale and fragile, went white as snow. "She was killing me," he whispered. "Every meal she made, every tea she brought." His voice broke. "This morning before you came, she was here. I told her I loved her." I held his hand while he cried, watching the betrayal break him piece by piece. "She made me doubt myself," he said finally. "The confusion, the memory lapses. She said it was stress. She said I needed her." He looked at me, eyes hollow and furious. I trusted her with everything. The machines beside him beeped steadily. His color was better, but the wounds inside him were deeper than any poison. Then, after a long silence, he said, "I'll testify." His voice was steady, cold. "Whatever the DA needs, I'll tell them how she controlled my diet, my medication, my life, how she cut me off from you and everyone else. She won't do this to anyone." Again. I kissed his forehead. "She won't. I promise." The plan was set. Tomorrow, Malcolm would meet with Sienna wearing a wire. They'd discuss the guardianship papers and the life insurance. The pieces of her scheme she thought were still hidden. Julian would continue to play unconscious, giving her confidence. And when she made her next move, because predators always do, we'd be waiting. Sienna thought she was the spider, spinning her delicate web of lies around my son. But she'd mistaken the prey. She was already caught in mine, a web of evidence, witnesses, and a mother's cold determination. This time every thread would hold, and when the trap closed, it wouldn't just take her freedom, it would take her name, her mask, and the life she built on other people's graves. The call came at dawn. Julian was in distress, or so Sienna was told. "His vitals are dropping. You should come immediately." It was all staged. Julian was stable, recovering, but we needed her desperate enough to make one final mistake. I watched from the staff break room as she burst through the ICU doors 20 minutes later, hair uncombed, panic on her face. Not love, greed. She thought she was losing her payday. Malcolm arrived half an hour later, wearing the wire. The police were stationed in an unmarked van in the parking garage, listening to every word. Detective Morrison had briefed me earlier. "We need her to confess," she'd said, in her own words. "Can your son handle this?" I'd looked at Julian, pale but fierce, and nodded. "He can." He was stronger than Sienna ever knew. Sienna went into Julian's room alone. Malcolm lingered in the hall, his hidden mic recording. Through the cracked door I heard her footsteps, the rustle of her coat, and then her voice, cold, stripped of performance. "Just let go, Julian. Stop fighting. It's easier this way." My fists clenched. Grace's hand on my arm reminded me to wait. Julian's voice came next, soft but clear. "Sienna? Why are you doing this?" There was a pause, then a low, bitter laugh. "Because you were supposed to be easy money. Marry the rich architect, play the devoted wife, wait for the inheritance. But you kept surviving. 7 months, Julian, 7 months I've been patient. Do you know how exhausting it is pretending to care while praying you'd die?" Her words cut like glass. But they were perfect. Proof. "The tea," Julian said weakly. "The vitamins. You were poisoning you," she finished. "Arsenic. Small, regular doses. Just like Marcus." Marcus. Her previous husband. She'd confessed to his murder on tape. Detective Morrison would be exhaling in relief inside that van. Sienna continued, chillingly calm. "I learned from my mistakes with him. Cremation was smart, but the family got suspicious. With you, I planned better. Longer timeline. Perfect paperwork. No one would question a grieving widow ending her husband's suffering." Then the sound that froze my blood. The change in Julian's IV monitor. "What are you doing?" Julian asked, panic rising. "Fixing my mistake," she said. "You were supposed to die days ago. This ends now." "Now!" Grace's voice sliced through the air. She burst into the room with 2 security guards, followed by Detective Morrison and 3 officers. "Step away from the patient! Hands where I can see them!" Sienna's mask shattered. Shock, rage, calculation in seconds. She dropped the syringe she'd been holding and bolted, but the officers blocked the door. Grace stood firm beside Julian. I stepped from the break room directly into Sienna's path. "Going somewhere, daughter?" I asked, my voice ice cold. She froze, eyes full of venom. "You," she spat. "You poisoned him against me. You ruined everything." The officers seized her, yanking her hands behind her back. "Sienna Vale," Detective Morrison said. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and the homicide of Marcus Grayson. You have the right to remain silent." "He was abusive," Sienna screamed, thrashing. "Julian hit me. I had to protect myself." She looked wildly around for sympathy. "He controlled me. I was scared." It was a desperate performance, her last. Morrison's tone was cold steel. "We have your confession on tape. You poisoned your husband for money and admitted to killing Marcus Grayson. There's no defense for murder." They led her away in cuffs, still shouting lies. I watched her go. The woman I'd once welcomed into my home, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She'd thought she could outsmart everyone, that she could murder my son and walk away rich, but she'd underestimated me. A mother's love sharpened into vengeance. That was her final mistake. When I stepped back into Julian's room, he was sitting upright, trembling but alive. Grace was adjusting his removing the discarded syringe, likely a lethal dose meant to finish what the arsenic began. "It's over," I whispered. Julian met my eyes, his face pale but calm. "Is it?" he asked quietly. He was right. The arrest was only the beginning, the trial, the testimony, the public exposure, the healing. But for now, Sienna Vale was in custody, my son was breathing, and justice, patient, relentless, and cold as I'd become, was finally within reach. The media found us within hours of Sienna's arrest. By morning, news vans crowded the hospital entrance, reporters shouting questions at anyone who passed. Wealthy socialite accused of poisoning husband for inheritance. The headlines screamed from every screen. Cameras zoomed in on Julian's hospital window. Our private nightmare had become public entertainment. Sienna's booking photo played on repeat, flawless even in custody, her expression calm, unreadable. They aired footage of our home, Julian's architecture firm, our family at charity events. Our grief was broadcast for strangers to dissect. Inside Julian's room, we sat in silence, watching the world turn our pain into spectacle. Tobias called that afternoon. "The Grayson case is being reopened," he said. The DA ordered Marcus Grayson's body exhumed. "They're testing for arsenic." His tone carried grim satisfaction. "Her whole web is coming apart." Within days, the story exploded nationwide. Marcus's sister appeared on television, tearfully recounting her brother's sudden illness. "I knew she'd killed him," she said, voice trembling. "Now there's proof." The Grayson family filed a wrongful death lawsuit, determined to expose every lie Sienna had buried. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The hospital's toxicology reports showed chronic arsenic poisoning, elevated levels in Julian's blood, hair, and tissue. The pattern was undeniable, small doses over months, perfectly timed to mimic illness. Experts on the news explained how arsenic poisoning imitated natural disease, how easily a patient could die while doctors searched for answers. I watched those reports in numb silence, realizing how close I'd come to losing him, believing it was just stress. Then Malcolm Dietrich's testimony leaked. In exchange for leniency, he detailed everything. How Sienna had approached him 6 months earlier, paying in cash for legal help that would let her handle things quietly. He drafted guardianship papers, adjusted insurance policies, and ignored every red flag for money. She said her husband wouldn't last much longer, he admitted on record. She wanted control of his estate before he passed. Hearing it made my skin crawl. He'd called my son's planned murder paperwork. Julian gave his formal statement from his hospital bed. Cameras were barred, but the transcript went public. He described the daily rituals of his poisoning, the herbal tea, the vitamins, the meals prepared with love. "I thought she was taking care of me," he wrote. "I didn't realize she was killing me one meal at a time." The media devoured it, turning his pain into headlines about the psychology of intimate betrayal. When police searched our home, I went with them. Watching strangers open every cabinet felt like a second violation. In the basement, behind paint cans and old decorations, they found a locked metal box. Inside were bottles of rat poison, rubber gloves, and a small notebook filled with dates and measurements, her private record of Julian's slow death. The toxicology team tested everything: tea canisters, vitamin bottles, leftover food. Several came back positive for arsenic. She hadn't even tried to hide it properly. Her arrogance had been her undoing. Tobias's financial findings broke next. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands held nearly $300,000, money siphoned from Julian's business in small, undetectable transfers. They uncovered fake IDs under 3 different names and one-way tickets to Buenos Aires, booked for 2 weeks after doctors had predicted Julian's decline. She'd planned it all: the death, the payout, the escape. The precision was monstrous. At the bail hearing, her new public defender tried to argue for house arrest. The prosecutor laid out the truth: the arsenic, the money trail, the prior homicide, the escape plan. "Ms. Val is an extreme flight risk and a danger to others," he said flatly. "She's already killed once." The judge didn't hesitate. Bail denied. Sienna would await trial in county jail. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I sat alone in my quiet house that night, the same house where I'd once celebrated Julian's wedding, toasted to Sienna's future, called her family. Now her face filled every channel, and I felt nothing but emptiness. How had I missed it? How had I mistaken greed for love, manipulation for devotion? I'd welcomed a monster into my home, handed her my trust, and she'd weaponized it against my son. That night, the phone rang. Marcus Grayson's sister was crying. "I saw the news," she said softly. "I suspected when Marcus died, but I was afraid. Afraid to accuse her, afraid to be wrong, and she got away with it because I stayed silent. But you didn't. You fought back. Because of you, she won't hurt anyone else." Her words should have comforted me. Instead, they broke me. We cried together, 2 women bound by the same wound, mourning men we loved and the innocence we'd lost. I realized that justice, when it finally came, didn't heal. It exposed. It stripped everything bare: the guilt, the anger, the truth of what we'd ignored. Julian was alive. Sienna was behind bars. The world finally knew what she'd done. But victory felt hollow, like survival mistaken for triumph. The poison she'd fed my son had seeped into everything: our memories, our trust, our sense of safety. It lingered in the air of every room she'd touched. Justice was coming, yes, but no verdict could erase the scars she'd left behind. 6 months passed before the trial began. 6 months of Julian's slow recovery, endless depositions, and learning to live with betrayal. When the day finally came, I dressed in black, not for mourning, but for battle. The courthouse was chaos: reporters swarming, protesters shouting, cameras flashing. Inside, every seat was filled. Marcus Grayson's family sat in the front row. His sister met my gaze and nodded. We were bound by the same wound. Julian sat beside me, pale but alive, Grace's hand in his. Something unspoken had grown between them, fragile but real. When the trial began, the prosecution moved like a machine. They laid out everything: financial theft, fake identities, forged signatures, the wire recording of Sienna's cold confession. Each exhibit was another nail sealing her fate. The jury's faces shifted from disbelief to horror as they saw the truth unfold. On the 3rd day, Julian took the stand. He walked slowly, still fragile, but his voice was steady. "She told me she loved me," he said, eyes locked on Sienna. "Every morning when she brought me tea, every night when she gave me vitamins. She said she loved me while she was killing me." His words hung heavy in the courtroom. I trusted her with everything: my health, my life, and she used that trust to destroy me. Grace followed, composed but fierce. "I've been a nurse 12 years, she said. Ms. Vale didn't act like a grieving wife. She acted like someone managing a project that was taking too long. She described the inconsistencies, her suspicions, and the night she hid me behind the door. Her testimony was precise, devastating, and left no doubt of Sienna's guilt. Then Malcolm Dietrich took the stand, exchanging his cooperation for 5 years in prison. His confession was chilling. She asked how long it would take him to die, he said flatly. She wanted to know how soon she could access his money. He read aloud their emails, discussions about insurance payouts and asset transfers. His betrayal of Sienna was complete, though he deserved none of my pity. The defense was desperate. They painted Julian as delusional, his memories unreliable from illness. They accused me of poisoning his mind against his wife out of jealousy and control. Mrs. Hartwell couldn't accept another woman in her son's life, the defense argued. She turned him against Sienna. The jurors didn't buy it. They'd heard Sienna's own voice on tape, cold and clear. When I took the stand, I faced Sienna directly. She sat at the defense table, hair tied back, glasses she didn't need perched on her nose, playing the innocent. "I welcomed you as family," I said quietly. "I loved you like a daughter. And you repaid that love with poison. You didn't kill for passion or fear. You killed for money." Her expression cracked, a flicker of rage before she hid behind her mask again. The prosecution's final blow was Marcus Grayson's exhumation report. Arsenic found in his remains. The forensic pathologist explained, same poison, same delivery method, same patient timeline. This is not coincidence, it's a pattern. The jury didn't need more. They deliberated for just 4 hours. "Guilty on all counts," the foreperson announced. "Attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy." The verdict was unanimous. I watched Sienna's face, blank, calculating, unrepentant. Even now, she whispered to her lawyer, already plotting appeals. That was her true nature, no remorse, only strategy. 2 weeks later came sentencing. The judge's voice was clear and cold. "Ms. Vale, you exploited love and turned trust into a weapon. You murdered one man and tried to murder another for greed. You show no remorse and no humanity. You are a predator." Her gavel fell like thunder. 35 years to life, no parole. It was over. Walking out of the courthouse beside Julian, I felt no triumph, only exhaustion. We had won justice, but victory didn't heal. My son was alive but changed, the light in his eyes dimmed by betrayal. I had been blind, fooled by charm and civility, and that blindness had nearly cost him his life. Sienna's poison had seeped deeper than blood. It had corrupted faith, love, and trust, the invisible bonds that once held our family together. The bleeding had stopped, yes, but the scars would never fade. Justice had been served, but peace was something we'd have to rebuild, one fragile day at a time. 1 year after the trial, Julian and I sat across from each other at my dining table. The same table where I'd first noticed something was wrong, where Sienna's mask had slipped for just a moment while she controlled and manipulated my son. We'd instituted a tradition of Sunday dinners, just the two of us, rebuilding what had been shattered one careful meal at a time. He was healthier now, color back in his cheeks, weight restored, but there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Laugh lines had been replaced by worry lines. The easy trust he'd once carried like a birthright was gone, replaced by careful vigilance that broke my heart even as I understood its necessity. "My therapist says I'm making progress," Julian said, pushing food around his plate. He was in therapy twice a week, working through the trauma of intimate betrayal. "She says it's normal that I have trust issues, that being poisoned by someone you love doesn't just damage your body. It damages your ability to believe in people." He looked up at me with eyes that were older than they should be. "I loved someone who saw me as a bank account, as a means to an end. Everything she said, everything she did, it was all performance. How do you come back from that?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "One day at a time, one dinner at a time, one moment of choosing to trust again, even when it's terrifying." I understood his struggle intimately, because I fought the same battle. Late at night, alone in my home, I replayed every interaction with Sienna, searching for the signs I'd missed. They were there, I realized. Subtle but present. The way she'd isolated Julian from his friends, claiming they were bad influences. The control she'd exerted over his diet and schedule, disguised as loving care. The too bright smile when discussing his health, like someone playing a role they'd rehearsed. I'd seen it all and explained it away as devotion. The guilt sat heavy in my chest, a constant weight. Could I have stopped it sooner? Were there moments when intervention would have saved Julian months of suffering? The questions had no answers, only endless circular reasoning that my own therapist said I needed to release. Grace visited most Sundays now, joining us for dinner and the careful reconstruction of normalcy. She'd become more than the nurse who'd saved Julian's life. She'd become family, bound to us not by blood or marriage but by the crisis we'd survived together. I watched the way Julian looked at her, careful but warm, cautious but genuine. Something was growing between them, born in the worst circumstances but rooted in authentic care. Grace had seen Julian at his most vulnerable and stayed, had fought for him when fighting meant risking her career. That kind of loyalty couldn't be faked. Julian knew it. So did I. Tobias sent regular updates about Sienna's appeals process. She was claiming mental illness now, arguing that she'd suffered from some undiagnosed condition that made her unable to understand the wrongness of her actions. Her lawyers filed motion after motion, grasping at any technicality that might reduce her sentence or grant a new trial. "The odds are against her," Tobias assured me over the phone. "The evidence is overwhelming. The confession is on tape. The pattern with Marcus Grayson establishes premeditation." "She's going to die in prison, Mrs. Hartwell. That's not vindictiveness. That's just reality." His words should have comforted me. Mostly they just made me tired. Marcus Grayson's family reached out occasionally, cards and phone calls that expressed gratitude I wasn't sure I'd earned. "You saved others from our fate," his sister wrote in a letter I kept in my desk drawer. "Because you fought. Because you weren't afraid to see the truth. Sienna won't hurt anyone else. My brother can finally rest in peace knowing his death meant something. That it stopped her." I read that letter when the guilt became too heavy, when I needed to remember that fighting back had mattered, that survival wasn't just for us, but for the victims who might have come after, the men Sienna would have hunted if she'd succeeded with Julian. Julian was dating again. Tentatively. Carefully. But dating. I saw the way he evaluated people now, watching for inconsistencies between words and actions, listening for the false notes in declarations of affection. He'd learned to trust his instincts again, and more importantly, to trust mine. "What do you think of her?" he'd asked after introducing me to a woman from his architecture firm. I'd been honest. "She seems nice, but watch how she treats service workers. Watch what she does when she thinks no one's paying attention." He'd nodded, understanding. We'd both learned the same hard lesson. Character reveals itself in unguarded moments. I visited Maxwell's grave on the anniversary of the trial's end, stood in front of the headstone and told my late husband everything. "I protected our son," I said to the marble and the grass, and the memory of the man who'd taught me to watch people when they thought no one was watching. "Just like you asked. I almost lost him, Max. I almost failed. But I didn't. I fought, and I won, and he's alive." The tears came then, hot and healing, the release of a year's worth of tension. "I wish you were here," I whispered. "I wish you'd been here to see through her. You always could read people better than I could." But he wasn't here, and I'd had to do it alone, and somehow, impossibly, I had. Sunday dinner. 3 weeks later, Grace stayed after I'd cleared the dishes. Julian was nervous, fumbling with his water glass the way he used to before big presentations. Then he took Grace's hand and said, "I have something to ask you." My heart stopped, started, raced. He pulled out a small velvet box. "Grace Mabry, you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You saw what no one else saw. You fought when fighting meant risking everything. You stayed when staying was hard." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." I watched them embrace and felt something crack open in my chest. Not pain exactly. Relief. Hope. Julian was choosing someone who'd proven her character in the hardest possible circumstances. Someone who'd saved him rather than destroyed him. Someone whose love was demonstrated through action, not performance. This was real. This was earned. This was everything Sienna had pretended to be but never was. Family, I realized, wasn't just blood or marriage certificates or legal documents defining relationships. Family was who fought for you in the dark, who risked everything to save you, who stayed when staying was terrifying and leaving would be easier. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I disagree. What doesn't kill you just makes you wiser about who to trust, scarred but smarter, wounded but watchful. We'd inherited scars from Sienna's betrayal, Julian's damaged trust, my persistent guilt, the permanent knowledge that evil could wear the face of love. But we'd also inherited something else, clarity. the ability to see through pretense to truth, the understanding that real love wasn't performance or control or careful manipulation. It was Grace hiding me behind a door and whispering, "Trust me." It was Tobias taking a case because he hated people who preyed on trust. It was Marcus Grayson's sister fighting for justice years after her brother's death. It was Julian choosing, despite everything, to risk love again. The scars would never fully fade, but they were proof we'd survived, proof we'd fought, proof that when it mattered most, when everything hung in the balance, we'd chosen truth over comfort and justice over silence. Sienna had tried to poison us all, not just with arsenic, but with doubt and fear and broken faith. She'd failed. We were still here, still fighting, still learning to trust again, one careful step at a time. And that, I finally understood, was the truest victory of all.